They say that no matter how scary a horror movie is, it's still just a movie. They say it can't hurt you. But what if I told you that this was a lie? That there exists one such movie that can hurt you in ways you didn't even think possible. You, a keen cinema goer, may be thinking of something like The Exorcist, the film which famously caused several heart attacks and was even said to have brought on a miscarriage when it premiered in 1973.
I passed out in about the first half hour, yeah. It's just, it doesn't, it doesn't make me want to get sick like everybody says. It just, my legs are just going, nyeh.
Mere child's play compared to the subject of today's review. We're covering a movie so vile that few have the stomach to watch it, so terrible that no one dares speak of it, so sickening that the director had to actually apologize to audiences. Are you scared yet? Well friends, strap in, because today we'll be doing something that no one in their right mind should ever do. Talking extensively about Silent Hill Revelation 3D.
Rivers of regret, just let them be, won't let them run between you and me, rivers of regret.
When I say this movie hurt me, I mean it. Now, it didn't put me into the hospital or anything. I didn't die from watching it, though that would have been something of a mercy. I'm talking about emotional pain. Never before or since has a movie disappointed me faster or as severely as Silent Hill Revelation. I didn't even know this movie existed until it was released on Vudu back in 2013. It just appeared in my life one day like a curse when a friend of mine rented it on a whim.
Sir? Thinner.
Apparently it had already been out of theaters for a few months at that point, and for me to have not even heard of it was kind of odd. You see, when it comes to things like movies and horror games, and movies based on horror games, I'm what you would call I'm something of a huge loser.
This password's really easy to remember. It's just my nickname in high school.
Specifically when it comes to Resident Evil and Silent Hill. I love them, but apparently I missed this movie entirely. Like I was living under a rock or there was a thick fog preventing me from knowing about it. Little did I know that fog was actually trying to protect me. But alas, I sat down to watch this movie and was absolutely elated when I saw Heather running around Lakeside Amusement Park at the start. Silent Hill 3 was my favorite game in the series after all, and Heather Mason was my favorite character. The fact that this was an adaptation of that game was such a great surprise, I was actually just smiling ear to ear. But then the movie kept going. And going. And going. And going. And going. And going. And going.
Okay, you know what?
Oh god, no. 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 No.
Oh, do you Facebook?
Fuck Facebook, do you?
What's your name?
Fuck Facebook. Names don't matter. Okay, you know what? Fuck Facebook.
And going.
What's your name?
Do you think there's a difference between dreams and reality?
And going.
Fuck Facebook, do you? Do you think there's a difference between dreams and reality?
Silent Hill Revelation was released in 2012 and takes place roughly 6 years after the first film. As I mentioned, it is a loose adaptation of the Silent Hill 3 video game. I say loose because this movie is a bit of a narrative nightmare.
What a nightmare.
Originally, Christoph Gans and Roger Avery were set to return to Silent Hill together for the sequel. The original had opened at #1 at the box office and went on to make a respectable $100 million worldwide. And when you add the $22 million from home video sales, Silent Hill 2006 was among the top 10 highest grossing film adaptations of video game properties ever made. But as fate would have it, Christoph was about to start pre-production on Capcom's big screen adaptation of Onimusha. And Roger Avery was unavailable to write the script due to some legal issues. We all know the real star of the first movie wasn't the script though. It was cinematographer Dan Laustsen. And without Christoph, there was basically no shot of getting him back. The Onimusha movie he was working on ultimately fell through, but later he would go on to give a different reason for not returning. Quote, "When I understood the producers wanted to make the film a sort of Resident Evil, I refused." End quote. shots fired, but also, where's the lie? Those Resident Evil movies share a certain quality with this new Silent Hill movie by the end. If you look really close, you might be able to spot what it is. So with the original team out of the question, in came MJ Bassett. The original script from Avery was rewritten by Bassett, and she was given the role of director to boot. As always with these adaptations, fans heard all about what a big fan of the games the director was.
As a gamer, as a fan of the games, the challenge is to make sure it feels respectful to what those games do. The first Silent Hill was a seminal game. It changed the landscape of survival horror. It used sound design and visuals in a way that nobody had really been doing before that.
But this time around, it seemed like the director wanted fans to feel even more assured. She would go on to use her blog to keep fans informed of the film's progress and production. I'll give her credit for this. I think it's pretty cool to keep fans informed on the production of things. However, instead of reassuring fans that things were being made with love and care to the franchise, it ultimately led to some contention between Bassett and fans before filming had even started. Bassett made the mistake of posting blog entries asking for fans' opinions on who they would like to see in the roles of Heather and Claudia. Adelaide Clemens was eventually chosen for the role of Heather, though no one had suggested her, and later another poll was created in a similar fashion asking for Claudia's suggestions. One popular candidate for the role was Donna Burke. She did the voice and mocap for Claudia after all, so the Konami fan favorite seemed like a pretty great choice. But Bassett was again disappointed by the suggestions and removed the post. So why ask in the first place? The whole exchange was weird and did nothing but raise concerns from the fans who, rightfully so, were already worried about the premise of this movie.
This movie's got lots of jobs to do. If you're a gamer, you've got to enjoy it because it's compelling and adhering to the game. If you like the first movie, you want a sequel to the first movie, so you want the ongoing story of these characters. And if you haven't seen either, and you've got to go, hey, we're going to see that Silent Hill Revelation movie because it looks like a great movie. And it's got to work in its own right.
On top of adapting the storyline from Silent Hill 3, Revelation also had to serve as a direct sequel to the original film made by Christoph Gans back in 2006, which adapted the original Silent Hill game and took some liberties with the canon, like replacing existing characters with new ones, ignoring some characters altogether, and playing with the motives and backstory of the Order. They're the antagonistic organization that is present in most Silent Hill games. They're basically a doomsday cult obsessed with completing a ritual using Heather that will birth their god, and we see a lot of them in the first and third games. The first movie changed this motivation entirely and killed them off at the end, which made faithfully adapting Silent Hill 3, a story that centers around this cult, pretty much impossible to do without retconning the events of the first film. But it was decided pretty early into production that this would be a sequel first, adaptation second, and there wouldn't be any retcons to undo anything from the first movie, so says MJ Bassett. So how did Bassett manage to faithfully adapt the Silent Hill 3 story while maintaining the canon established in the original movie, all without any retcons? Well, the short answer is she didn't. There are a ton of changes, to the point that you actually start to wonder if they even cared about the continuity at all. Not only were there major changes from the game, which when it comes to movie adaptations, I think we all just expect stupid changes at this point, but they changed a lot of things from the original movie as well. Little things like Sharon and Alessa's age changing from 9 to 11, and bigger things like the lore of Silent Hill itself. For example, instead of the fire starting from Alessa being burned, it was actually Alessa that created the fire herself because she was so angry that she was burned. Okay, weird change. Hell, they didn't even get the Silent Hill sign on the right side of the road. There are actually so many changes from the original movie and the game that I would have to make an entire separate video to cover them all, but I'll try to point out the biggest inconsistencies as we recap the movie. So the movie opens up with one of the most hack things you can ever do, and right away you know something is wrong. Next to a gunshot and cut to black, there is probably nothing worse you can do in your film than have a dream within a dream sequence. Everyone who has ever watched a movie before knows this, and to begin like that is like starting the movie on red alert.
Red alert.
What the hell is happening?
The barriers between quantum realities are breaking down. Other realities are emerging into our own.
Do you think there's a difference between dreams and reality?
Right away, I felt like I was not in good hands. 2 minutes into the movie, and the bar can't get much lower though. I stand corrected. That's right, it's going to be one of those horror movies. You know, the ones with the super loud jump scares that are devoid of any craft or nuance. This movie has them in spades. The subtle atmospheric stuff that Silent Hill is known for is completely out the window, and in its place are Pop-Tart jump scares, bum face jump scares, stuffed animal jump scares. I wish I were kidding, but that's where we're at. And that's just the first few minutes of the movie. That smile I mentioned having during the first few shots of this film was long gone at this point, and all that was left was sadness.
Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you.
The film continues the full-on assault to your senses with this breakfast scene, which is sometimes out of focus. We learn through some clumsy spoon-fed dialogue that Sharon's latest alias is Heather, who in the game was the reincarnation of both Alessa and Cheryl as one being again. But here she's just that kid from the first movie as a teenager.
I was Sharon, then Mary, then Kathy, now Heather.
Names don't matter.
That's right, names don't matter, characters don't matter, source material most definitely does not matter. Nothing matters anymore. So she wasn't possessed by that demon at the end of the first movie after all? I guess Rose somehow got her out using this mostly useless seal from the games? And now the cult wants her back so they can summon their god, which is taken from the first and third game, but didn't they want her to die in the first movie because they thought it would end their purgatory in the fog world?
We burn this witch! We vanquish evil!
The god can only be born through your flesh.
So Heather and Harry have been on the run from the cult all these years? Didn't they all die in the first movie? Well, I guess they didn't, and there were some even more extreme cultists that Alessa never mentioned or killed. They are more concerned with the storyline from the games about birthing a god, and they've even got a different evil cult logo. But they're the same cult, I guess?
They were waiting for a child to be born, to be a vessel for their god, who would then be resurrected and make the world anew. My dad doesn't believe that, though. It says here, religious zealots called... Her name's Alessa. They called her Alessa, and Alessa's revenge was to summon the world into those crazy, terrifying creatures. He's frightened, but this is crazy. It was originally a valley ground taken from the native Indians.
I thought everyone knew that.
This is all getting too confusing. I think I need a drink. Anyway, it's Heather's first day at her new school, and of course, the walk to the bus is filled with jump scares! Classic Silent Hill. It's here that we get another big red alert that this movie is going to miss the mark entirely on the game adaptation side of things. This scene in the games plays out quite differently in both setting and characterization. Video game Heather has a pretty strong personality. She's snarky and sarcastic, and often commanding and blunt with people that are annoying her.
Are you still following me? Do I have to scream?
She more or less tells Douglas to go fuck himself in the game, but here she just slinks away and even apologizes.
Sorry, what?
The fuck? The movie also manages to make Douglas seem creepier than he is in the games, and that's saying something. He's just minding his own business while respecting that court order that requires him to maintain a certain distance from any school. Nothing creepy about this. Not sure why she wouldn't trust you, dude. Honestly, what's her deal? In both the game and the movie, his objective is mostly the same. He's a PI that's been hired by Claudia to find Heather and return her to Silent Hill, but when he realizes who he's dealing with, he does everything he can to help save Heather from the cult. In the game, he gives her a ride to Silent Hill and bonds a bit with her by the end.
Sorry. I didn't mean to offend you.
No offense taken.
In the movie, he's killed at the mall by old Butthole Eyes here and doesn't get a chance to tell Heather everything. Who's old Butthole Eyes, you ask? Well, it ain't a monster from the games, that's for sure. It's actually Claudia. Instead of showing up and antagonizing Heather throughout the movie, she's instead a stupid monster that inexplicably shows up a few times to keep Heather from knowing the truth. But we don't find out it's Claudia until the end, so her impact as an antagonist is completely absent throughout most of the film, which is just what you want from your villain in your movie. Our next ruined character is Vincent, who in the movie plays the forced romantic interest for Heather. His mom is Claudia, who by the way is sisters with Christabella, which would also make her sisters with Dahlia, which would make her the aunt of Alessa, so technically they'd be cousins. It's so wrong, but it feels so right. Now this is before Game of Thrones, but nothing about this is right. In the game, Vincent is a priest in the order, though he's kind of an outlier and believes differently from Claudia. He has his own greedy motives in the game that keep him a mystery to Heather and the player, but in this movie, he's just the son of Claudia, who was sent to gain her trust and lure her back to Silent Hill. I guess he was able to travel to the real world without the seal thanks to this ritual. But once he meets Heather, he can't help but fall in love, despite there being no chemistry between them at all. Yeah, the whole love subplot is just awful, and when you consider that it replaces the game version of Vincent, who was much more layered and interesting of a character for the narrative, it hurts just that much more. There's never really any reason to believe that these characters should like each other, and it just further waters down the Heather character by making her rely on this dweeb for guidance. No way Game Heather would have put up with this crap. But either way, Vincent obviously has knowledge of Silent Hill and offers to help Heather find her father. See, in Revelation, Harry isn't murdered by Claudia, and Heather isn't motivated by revenge.
I'll get you for this!
Instead, Harry has been kidnapped and is being used to bait Heather back to Silent Hill because she has to return of her own free will for some reason.
Why take him? Why not just take me?
Because you have to return of your own free will. Taking him, they knew you'd follow.
So she does, and of course, spooky hijinks ensue. She gets the other half of the MacGuffin, which manages to make even less sense in this film than it did in the game. Apparently this thing is super important now. Yet when old Butthole Eyes attacks Heather and Vincent at Jack's Inn, she just leaves it neatly on the bed for Heather to find in the morning. I guess she didn't really need it that bad. Heather still goes through a lot of trouble to get the other half from Leonard though. He's played by Malcolm McDowell and apparently almost went blind thanks to these contacts. I don't know what it is about Malcolm McDowell and eye injuries, but they seem to go hand in hand. Anyway, he takes Heather's half of the seal and turns into the Leonard monster from the games. Heather gets the seal back from him easy peasy though, because everything in this movie needs to be resolved in no more than 2 minutes. And when Heather gives the seal to Claudia at the end, it just reveals that she was old Butthole Eyes all along. Woo! And then we get this super cool monster fight. So what was the point of the seal? To make people turn into a monster for Pyramid Head to fight? Oh well, I guess just shut up and look at the monsters fight. Isn't that cool? So that's basically the story of Silent Hill Revelation. It's pretty easy to see why things were a mess narratively, but just how bad was the execution? Did this horror movie at least deliver the goods when it came to scares? In your restless dreams, you already know the answer. Nope.
Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you.
So when a video game gets adapted into a movie, it almost never follows the games one-to-one, which is something I believe you should always aim for when adapting anything. And despite what some of the internet's greatest debaters will try and tell you, that does not mean that the movie should try to recreate everything down to the gameplay one-to-one. No one is advocating for a movie that follows Heather around as she looks for key items and explores the same room for the 5th time. What I mean when I say one-to-one is how the movie adapts the narrative and the characters of the game. To me, the story and the characters therein are the one thing that you shouldn't really fuck with unless it's absolutely in need of change. You can make some minor tweaks to things, of course, but the further you stray from the original material, the more inclined you are to fail. There's a reason the original games warranted a film adaptation in the first place, and those changes are only going to upset and turn the fans on you in the end, while general audiences will be none the wiser, and more often than not end up confused by the convoluted plot that filmmakers come up with. But there's more to a one-to-one adaptation than just following the story and staying true to the characters. The other key thing you need to capture from the original material is tone. What is tone? Tone is basically the mood or atmosphere of a film. It can be dramatic, scary, funny, romantic, whatever. It's the overall feeling or mood you get from watching the film, and it is absolutely vital in telling your audience how to feel. Fans can forgive story or character changes to an extent. The less the better, but as long as it still feels true to the material in the end, you'll win them over. The one thing they won't be able to overlook, whether they realize it or not, is tone. Silent Hill Revelation misses the mark on both fronts. See, the Silent Hill games are known for being creepy. They take their time with building suspense and dread. A lot of things are left to the imagination and aren't immediately explained, if ever. This allows that mood to slowly wash over you and leave you feeling something by the end. They then use this horror setting and mood to explore their characters in a very interesting and meaningful way that players can relate to or sympathize with. There have been movies that have been closer in capturing that tone than either of the Silent Hill adaptations were. Things like Jacob's Ladder or any of David Lynch's movies like Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive capture a mood or tone that closer resembles what you would expect from a Silent Hill film. Instead, this movie went for that cheap and broad approach to things that reminds me a lot of just early 2000s horror. The tone of this movie also kind of reminds me of the Borley Haunted Mansion from Silent Hill 3, but without the self-awareness. They had a lot of cheesy jump scares in that segment, but it comes off as almost a parody of the horror that Silent Hill isn't.
That's Danny.
Then at the end, they drop the cartoonish antics and the tone suddenly shifts. You're being chased by that ominous red light, and the piercing static sound effect that's growing and growing just makes you feel like you're back in Silent Hill again. It's great. It also chased the re-emerging trend of 3D alongside almost a dozen other films released that year alone. This was a movie made for idiots, but don't take my word for it. Let's examine a random horror scene to see just how much the filmmakers respect your intelligence as an audience, shall we? Number 1, the mall scene. So this is one of the earliest horror sequences in the movie, and it perfectly exemplifies everything wrong with its tone. The scene starts with Heather sitting in the mall waiting on her dad to come pick her up. Right before this, we're treated to another awesome jump scare, but we'll just ignore that for now. The first thing I noticed when rewatching this scene were the sound effects. We hear children laughing menacingly as they run by, and then a deep bass hit when this clown looks at Heather. Watch out, whoa! Everything is telegraphing the scares by being so loud and in your face about it, and they end up being completely ineffective because they're trying so hard to be spooky. The problem is that there's no subtlety. There's nothing subtle about any of this. Which is what you would want if you were actually trying to stay true to the feeling of the game, if you were trying to capture that tone, which again should be among your top priorities in my opinion. But there is no slow build up and release of tension. It's just a full-on assault of sounds and images that are taken straight off a creepy things list some producer made. Now, kids are creepy? Check. Clowns? You betcha. Check. Fat guy? Double check. If the scene had Heather quietly leave this part of the mall after seeing those balloons, then maybe it could have been effective. We could have just had her end up isolated from people, and the shift to the Jacob's Ladder parody world could have been slow and subtle. Instead, the color grade just shifts immediately to this blue tone, and the colors become all distorted from being pushed too far in post. It looks scary, but not in the way they were intending. And it lets you know right away that she's in Silent Hill world, where everything's crazy. The kids turn into these lame zombie versions of themselves. Some say it's pretty cringe, but I think it's great that they had all the kids do the makeup themselves. Seriously, who approved this? As Heather sees Douglas approach, the sound effects double down, and we get back-to-back jump scares. The music builds up, and Douglas chases her down to the lower level of the mall. Apparently they run a flea market down here on Sundays. I don't know. Eventually, Douglas begins to tell Heather the truth of her past, but not before old Butthole Eyes shows up to stop him. As Douglas is explaining things to Heather, we see something drop from the ceiling behind him. We can literally see it in the corner of the frame before cutting to a reaction shot of him. Apparently, he can't see it. It is inches in front of him. But before we can build the suspense at all, we get a quick jump scare and a super cool 3D shot of his fingers getting chopped off. They take off in the elevator to escape, but they should know better than to run from old Butthole Eyes. God. It jumps onto the top of the elevator for more 3D schlock before this magic insert shot of the gears stopping makes her disappear. Seriously, how did that happen if Heather has been watching the entire time? And why did the monster just suddenly stop and leave? It wasn't just to set up another quick jump scare, was it? Damn it! I knew it. Scares like this are always predictable when you don't give them more than 5 seconds to play out. By allowing more time between this reaction shot and the initial attack, we could have just let the scene breathe a bit, so that the actual scare would have had more impact when it hits. We could have had Douglas looking into the darkness paired with a POV shot of the room that lasts just long enough for the audience to get a sense of the location. The room itself should have been very dark so we can believe that he cannot see this fucking stupid monster right in front of him. But instead, the room is pretty well lit. We can literally see the monster in the corner of the frame, but it all just happens so fast that they're hoping you don't notice or you don't think about it too much. You also don't think about how weird it was that they took the elevator further down, despite being on the lower level already. It must be a pretty big mall. But you can just hand wave that stuff away by saying, it's Silent Hill magic, and just go along with the movie. And that's basically the same mindset the filmmakers carried throughout the entire runtime of this film. The shift between the real world and the Silent Hill one doesn't quite follow a solid rule set like the first movie did. And that ends up hurting this movie a lot because without easy to follow rules for things, you end up confusing your audience instead of scaring them. In fact, they changed quite a bit about how things work from the first movie, especially when it comes to the monsters. So I had a big problem with the inclusion of Pyramid Head in the first film. It felt out of place and was obviously just there for fan service, but I'll say this, at least it didn't make him a total fucking joke. He was portrayed as a big threat to Rose and the other characters in Silent Hill. Having him tear off the skin of one of them cemented him as a force to be reckoned with. In that film, he was the protector of Alessa, but in this movie, he's just a working man, putting in his hours as the ride operator at the amusement park.
Working 9 to 5.
All the kids love Pyramid Head, and he's a real staple of the community. At the end, he helps Heather by 1v1ing old Butthole Eyes in a monster fight. In case you can't tell, I fucking hate this. It should already be obvious where I fall on all this crap, so I won't spend any more time on it. But I did want to mention the nurses. They're back! And they more or less have the exact same scene this time around. After Vincent gets grounded, it's up to Heather to rescue him. The only problem is that he's surrounded by these nurses who will slash at anything that makes sound. It's like it was in the first movie. Kind of. I think they more reacted to light in that one, which is what the butt face monsters do in this one. But nonetheless, these nurses react to sound. The movie makes that very clear. Literally, the smallest amount of sound can get you killed, as demonstrated here. So, the last thing this scene should have is dialogue.
How can I find my dad?
Heather, help me.
Tell me where he is.
I know they're supposed to be whispering, but come on. After establishing the rules, you can't just dance around them like this and expect the scene to hold any tension. If instead this scene had been executed with our characters giving visual cues to one another as they figure a way out of this situation, instead of this not so quiet movie whispering, then it could have actually been pretty good. It's the kind of scene I can see play out with nothing but visual storytelling. One that could have the audience even holding their breath because the suspense is just stretched so far. But instead, it's just as loud and just as dumb as everything else in this movie. But there is one monster that I see a lot of people online defend. Despite the cheap CG, the mannequin monster is one of those things you'll see brought up when people are listing positives from the movie. Personally, I don't get it. Part of the reason people like Masahiro Ito's creature design in the Silent Hill games is because it's often something you've never seen before. And when you discover the deeper meaning behind the design, it becomes more than just a cool looking creature. But along with Butthole Eyes, I have to say that this one feels just as uninspired to me. Let's pull up that producer's spooky things list again. Spiders? Check. Mannequins? Check. Alien mouth thing? Gotta have it. It's all just stuff I've seen before blended together. But I think the main reason I hate it so much is because it's just another loud and dumb scene that replaces a very subtle and memorable one from the game. The mannequin room scare from Silent Hill 3 is one of the best ones, and here it's replaced by this big loud chase that's over before you know it. We also meet a random character that just dies off before anything develops there.
Where did you come from? We took a wrong turn. Got lost in the fog.
It all just feels so awkward. Speaking of awkward, we gotta talk about. This movie is full of moments and characters that make me cringe.
Okay, you know what?
Some of the same things that made my skin crawl in the original are back too. Like them playing Promise. Twice in one scene even.
My dearest Sharon, if you're reading this and something has happened to me, you're on your own now.
Her name's Alessa. This order tried to cleanse her with fire, but they failed.
But beyond this, I also found the characters to be very embarrassing. The dialogue often feels so forced that I have a hard time connecting with any of these characters.
Let me make this easier for you. This is the 5th school I've been to since I was 11. Me and my dad would move around, so I do this a lot.
It also contradicts itself and invites plot holes to be discovered by attentive viewers. Like, why would Heather be advertising her past to these people? Isn't she supposed to be keeping a low profile?
I won't IM you or Facebook you or...
I'm starting to think that she actually does have a Facebook. Maybe her and Vincent became closer friends online and off camera, because we certainly never see it.
Do you Facebook?
Do you Facebook?
Do you? Do you?
Facebook you.
Do you? Do you?
IM you.
Do you Facebook?
Do you Facebook? Do you Facebook? Do you?
Blog. Read your blog. Read your blog.
Do you Facebook?
Tweet you. Read your blog. Read your blog.
Do you Facebook? Fuck Facebook.
I wouldn't really say they bonded during their overnight trip to Silent Hill, and just as a quick side note, by the way, weren't Heather and Harry on the run from this cult for years at this point? Why would they be within a night's drive from Silent Hill? You'd think he'd move her across the world if he truly wanted to disappear. I guess he wasn't trying that hard. I don't know, it always just bothered me. At any rate, the entire romance subplot can kick rocks. Changing Vincent from the dubious and infinitely more interesting character that he was in the games to this boring teenager asshole is just such a waste of the character. And it actually does distract from the real heart of the story, which should be Heather and her father Harry. This is another reason the tone of the movie just feels so messy and unfocused. When Harry decides to stay in Silent Hill to find Rose at the end, leaving his daughter with the cultist weirdo, I, like the movie, could not be bothered to care anymore. And then to fully induce the cringe coma on me, and to prove that this movie cares about its fans, it tacked on 2 unrelated Silent Hill references in the final minute to bait fans into being excited for a sequel that would have ruined those stories as well. I hate cheap fan service, and that's all that was. It was just thrown in to take your mind away from the previous hour and a half and to leave you excited about future movies as you left the theater. And I know it worked, because anytime you hear anyone talk about this movie, that's one of the few positives they'll list. Like, yeah, the movie was absolute dog shit. It changed everything from the game and the previous movie. It was just a total mess. But I like that Travis Grady cameo. I wonder if they'll do that one next. I can't wait. Or maybe it'll be Downpour, because see, at the end, that was actually the bus from that game. I can't fucking wait. You know what James is up to? Maybe he could make a cameo. He could be riding on Pyramid Head's back. Video game adaptations are often not taken as seriously as other adaptations, like say from a book or a graphic novel even. For whatever reason, there seems to be this mindset from filmmakers and even some of the fans that things don't really matter, and that changing things from the source material or making them feel cartoonish is acceptable because it's just a video game movie and you should have expected it to be bad.
Okay, you know what?
Fans will show up to watch your movie no matter what, and as long as the studio makes a profit, then they're happy. They know that fans will show up and give their support no matter how bad it looks or how far from the material it strays. Even when the filmmakers have a passion for the games, they end up changing things to fit the movie that they want to make, no matter how wrong it may be for the material they're adapting. As long as some neat references to the game were included, they'll get a pass. And everyone will complain about the movie being terrible, but show up first in line for the sequel. It never ends. Anyway, I hated this movie. It's kind of fun as a so bad it's good watch, but it's not one of my favorites for that or anything. And given my personal attachment to the source material, I find the movie more insulting than anything else. I know that MJ Bassett didn't feel happy about the end product. She felt like she settled and compromised too much, but it was ultimately her failings as writer and director that led to this. And I agree. It didn't help though that she was contentious with the fans before the project even started either. I'm sure being forced into filming 3D only limited them creatively as well, and it wasn't like the movie she wanted to make. But at the end of the day, a lot of these changes were unnecessary, and they started with the script. They didn't appeal to fans of the games or the broader movie-going audience either, and they just didn't make much sense. The tone of the movie was probably the biggest miss for me. And to me, it showed a total misunderstanding of how to adapt a game like Silent Hill 3 to the big screen. MJ would actually go on later to apologize for the film being such a pile of trash. And the saddest thing is that she could have saved the entire movie by including one simple thing from the games. Anyway, now Christoph Gans is in talks to make a third movie that will apparently focus more on the cult stuff. I guess it would pick up from this movie on some level, but I think that this series needs a full-on reboot. Either do the first game over again, this time with Harry as the lead, or cover Silent Hill 2 since it's a mostly standalone entry in the series. Or you know what, just don't make any more movies. I'm okay with that too. I'm not sure how much of this stuff I have left. Okay, it worked in the game. Well, it's working. I gotta get out of here. Oh my god. What the hell? The door's locked. What the hell locked the door? What the hell? Hey, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to catch more in the future. That's it for now. Bye.